All right, well, welcome and thank you all for coming. The tirade we just witnessed is one more grim landmark in the spreading authoritarianism of this administration, and it is a brand new embarrassment to the once revered Department of Justice. It's fascinating that the president used the word BS to describe the case against him, which resulted in dozens of criminal convictions, because that was the same word that his own Attorney General, William Barr, used to describe his deranged claim that he had won the 2020 presidential election when Joe Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. That was the word that Attorney General Barr, even one of his greatest defenders, used to describe his delusional claims about how there was election fraud and election irregularities. No other president in American history has stood at the Department of Justice to proclaim an agenda of criminal prosecution and retaliation against his political foes. This thoroughly partisan and delusional diatribe was a staggering violation of the traditional boundary between independent criminal law enforcement and presidential political power. The speak we just witnessed is a desecration of the essential values of the storied department in every way. It's an insult to the thousands of professional lawyers who go to work at the Department of Justice every day to enforce the rule of law, not the personal vendettas and partisan games of a politician. President Grant and Congress created the Department of Justice in 1870, 5 years after the Civil War, in the throes of Reconstruction. It was an exercise of Congress's powers under Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, which had just been added to the Constitution 2 years before. The purpose of the department was to protect the newly freed African American population in the South against escalating violence by the Ku Klux Klan and unrepentant secessionists. Congress wanted to protect the voting rights of the emancipated population against racial disenfranchisement schemes. Now, the Department of Justice, which first set out to defend the rule of law against white supremacy and vigilante violence, has become a department of injustice, cruelty, favoritism, and unfairness. One of Trump's first acts was to try to nullify the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which establishes that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen of the United States. And they tried to destroy that, leading to at least 4 federal courts invalidating this executive order: an Obama judge, a Biden judge, a Reagan judge, and even a Trump judge. And the Reagan judge said it was the easiest case he ever had to decide. You don't have to be a lawyer to know what's wrong with that executive order or any of the other ones. You just have to know how to read. And that judge was very clear about it. Now, until now, the basic concept of the rule of law in our history has been the idea that no one is above the law. There was, to be sure, law under King George, but it was a law that the monarch and the lords imposed on the rabble, the peasants and the poor, but it never applied to them. It never applied to themselves. In the 18th century, the American Revolution overthrew the kings, the lords, and the feudal barons to establish a nation where we would have a nation where all would be equal under the law. As Tom Paine put it, in the monarchies, the king is law, but in the democracies, the law is king. But amazingly, we now have a president in the 21st century who believes he's a king, and he believes that the king is the law once again. The first 7 weeks of this radical experiment in neo-monarchism has been a disaster for the rule of law and for the Constitution and for the First Amendment. There have been 120 federal cases filed against Donald Trump all over the country, and he has lost already in more than 40 courtrooms across the land where temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions have been issued against his lawless attack on the Constitution. This Department of Justice started out by empowering law enforcement The original Department of Justice started out by empowering law enforcement against insurrectionists and extremists. This DOJ has started out by empowering insurrectionists and extremists against law enforcement. President pardon, I'm sure you think so, because President Trump pardoned more than 1,500 insurrectionists. All right. President Trump pardoned more than 1,500 insurrectionists, hundreds of whom were extremists who violently assaulted our police officers with stun guns, chemical spray, batons, broken furniture, fire extinguishers, and Trump flags. This Department of Justice has gone even further. And maybe he's got a pardon. That's why he's so excited today. I don't know. But this Department of Justice has worked aggressively to get courts to dismiss unrelated criminal charges against pardoned January 6 convicts. They're people who were pardoned on January 6 who have had cocaine charges, well, they're January 6 felons who've had cocaine charges, drug charges, gun charges, sawed-off shotgun charges, hand grenade charges against them dismissed by this Department of Justice. And that was never covered by the original pardon. At Trump's Department of Justice, law and order means Trump will twist the law for you if you take orders from him. And that's, of course, what they did with Mayor Adams. And maybe I'll take a break here and I'll have something to say at the end about the Adams prosecution and the other people who've been let go as they've barreled through a pro-corruption agenda at the Department of Justice. But let me say this. Donald Trump has sacked more than a dozen of DC's best career criminal prosecutors because they worked to successfully convict January 6 insurrectionists. Many of them members of extremist groups and violent street gangs. This makes no sense. They're firing the best criminal prosecutors in Washington because they did their jobs against people like him. Congratulations, buddy. That's how the Nazis got started. You go have your own rally, all right? All right, now, I would now like to go to our originally scheduled program, if this gentleman would allow us to. I'm introducing Sean Brennan. I'm introducing Sean Brennan, who's a former assistant United States attorney, a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Capitol Siege section, who was fired by that man's hero, Donald Trump, because he prosecuted January 6 insurrections. Please welcome Sean Brennan. We'll take questions after, and I'll call on people. You go interview that guy, all right?
On January 31st, 2025, at about 5 p.m., I received a text message that hit me like a gut punch. I had just completed 3 weeks of training, intensive training alongside over a dozen of my colleagues, to begin working as a prosecutor, prosecuting local violent crime, and specifically in my case, domestic violence. That evening, the AUSA, whose caseload I was set to take over that very next Monday, texted me to introduce me to a victim of domestic violence here in the district. They said, "This is Sean. He's going to be the one who will help you with your case." And I was devastated because by that point, I knew I would not be able to help this victim of domestic violence secure justice. Because that night, I had already received this letter. This letter said that my hiring as an AUSA hindered interim U.S. Attorney Ed Martin's ability to implement President Trump's agenda. Setting aside the fact that it is squarely not the role of the Department of Justice to implement any president's agenda, it's hard to imagine what agenda would be hindered by prosecuting violent offenders of domestic violence here in the district. Of course, I didn't have to think very hard to figure out why I was really fired, because it said so right here in this exact letter. Echoing language from the president's executive order pardoning the defendants from the January 6 cases, I was told that I was fired for perpetrating a grave national injustice by seeking accountability for those who, through political violence, sought to interrupt our peaceful transfer of power. Now, it goes without saying that anyone who has watched any video from January 6th, anyone who has listened to any of the testimony of the heroic officers who fought to protect the Capitol that day, knows that no grave national injustice was perpetrated by trying to hold those people accountable. Still, with the almost immediate focus on retribution and firings, it became clear that President Trump's language from that executive order, seeking a process of national reconciliation, was nothing but empty rhetoric. However, I still had faith because, as a prosecutor, it is a guiding principle for me that no one is defined, even criminal defendants, by their worst day. I had hope that many of the defendants in my cases who I had seen articulate what appeared to be genuine expressions of remorse, I had hoped that they would take this new opportunity to start afresh. However, that's unfortunately not what we've seen. In the weeks since the pardons were enacted, I have heard of defendants in my cases who seemed genuinely willing to take accountability for their actions at sentencing, suddenly turn around and send harassing emails to FBI agents who investigated their cases, to seek out prosecutors on social media to taunt them. They have been emboldened. They have been told by their commander-in-chief that not only what they did was right, but they are the victims. Let that sink in. They are being told that they are the victims, not the officers who told me on many occasions they did not know if they would be able to return home to their families that night on January 6th. Now, I became a lawyer because I believe in the rule of law. But when we have people at the highest levels of government, both in the presidency and in the Department of Justice, telling violent rioters that political violence is okay as long as it's in support of the right person, that is incompatible with the rule of law and incompatible with the very virtues that the Justice Department is supposed to espouse. As Attorney General Bondi has said, the Department of Justice is the one department named after a virtue, the virtue of justice. As a prosecutor, my goal was never to win a case. My goal was to act in pursuit of justice and to stand in court representing the United States, not any individual president. It's a dark day for our country when it appears we have leaders in the Department of Justice who refer to themselves as the president's personal lawyers instead of what they really are, lawyers who swear an oath to the Constitution to defend all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean Brennan. I'd like to now introduce Brandon Yarrow, the former Assistant Chief Immigration Judge for the Executive Office for Immigration Review, United States Air Force veteran from Texas. Please welcome Mr. Yarrow.
Thank you all very much. Mr. Raskin, thank you for having us here and giving us this platform to share our stories, our experiences that we've had over the last few weeks. I stand here just as a citizen and a staunch supporter of the Republic that this gentleman has been shouting about for the last few minutes. I have served as a public servant for over 20 years in various roles in various agencies, and I think it is very convenient and poetic that I'm giving this statement here about 3 blocks from where my dedication to public service started. I was on a fall semester of my 3rd year in law school, and I was working at the Department of Justice in the environmental crime section, and that fall happened to be the fall of 2001. So my office was 3 blocks, again, right down the street. During September 11th of 2001. We had to experience that as staff members with the Department of Justice. We, after the attacks on the towers in the Pentagon, we were evacuated from our office. The metro wasn't working, cabs weren't available, and me and my supervisor had to walk from our office to the 14th Street Bridge to try to get back to Alexandria, where we both lived. They wouldn't let us cross the bridge. There's police officers there that wouldn't let us walk on foot across the bridge, and so people were literally driving up and picking up people to various towns in Alexandria and Annandale and things like that. And that experience then shaped, again, the next 20 years of my life, which has been dedicated to public service. After my 2nd year in law school, I was accepted into the Air Force Judge Advocate Corps, and knew that after that, our nation would be preparing for war. I entered in 2003. In April of 2003, I entered the Air Force as a military JAG, Judge Advocate General, as an attorney. And my career as public service ended exactly 4 weeks ago today, with not only me, but 6 of my colleagues who were doing the same job that I was doing. But I was in the Air Force for 6.5 years. I held positions as a prosecutor, defense counsel, and senior trial counsel. After that, I joined the Department of Homeland Security and represented the government in removal hearings before the immigration courts. While I was with the Department of Homeland Security for those 6 years, I served 2 terms as a special assistant United States attorney in Las Vegas and in Dallas, Texas. While in Dallas, Texas, I worked on a very involved H-1B visa fraud. And I did various other immigration-related prosecutions in both of those 2 positions. I then had the opportunity to join the U.S. Attorney's Office back in the District of Nevada. I spent about 4 years in that role. I prosecuted a variety of violent federally charged felonies, and to include fentanyl death cases, as well as gun cases, organized crime, white-collar crime, immigration-related offenses. I then joined the Federal Public Defender's Office for the District of Nevada and spent 2 years defending people that were charged with federal offenses. Then, based on this experience, I believe I was hired by the Department of Justice, the Executive Office of Immigration Review, to become an Assistant Chief Immigration Judge. And this position is a supervisory judge position. I not only had a docket where I heard cases before the immigration court, but I supervised a staff, I supervised the immigration judges, the attorney advisors that worked with us, and the rest of the staff at these courts. I initially was with the Buffalo Immigration Court, but within a month I was assigned to the Batavia Immigration Court, and then I assumed ACIJ supervisory responsibilities over the Detroit, Ulster, and Hartford immigration courts. Again, this was 3.5 years ago when I started that position, and in a very short time I had supervisory authority over 5 immigration courts. Most recently last year, I was asked to come down to the Houston, then Smith Street, now Houston Jefferson Street Immigration Court, and supervise the expansion and the move of half the court back into a new facility. We did that expertly with the staff that we had there and the folks that I worked with. And again, had a docket there and still supervised 4 other courts at that time. Again, that all ended 4 weeks ago when on Friday afternoon I received an email from the acting director of EOIR that indicated that I had been terminated. No cause was given, no notice. No justification for the termination other than it was my continued employment was not in the best interests of the agency. not only me, but there were 6 of my colleagues who had very similar roles as ACIJs throughout the courts that were also terminated with no notice, no justification, and no validation on that day. We are all professionals that adhere to the rule of law. We followed the policies that were put in place by our superior officers and superior supervisors, and our positions were that we are there to support all of the staff and to ensure that the immigration cases that came before our courts were heard expeditiously, fairly, and due process was protected for those people that came before the courts.
Can you guys hear this white liberal?
The only reason that that I'm here is to just demonstrate that when people are removed unfairly, unlawfully, there is an impact. It's an impact on me, it's an impact on my wife, it's an impact on my family, and it's an impact on the community at large. And this is even more shocking to me, again, as a 20-year public servant, that I was a disabled veteran. And the protections for disabled veterans were also not followed in my case. I never imagined in a minute that I'd be up here talking about my termination and removal unexpectedly from federal service after dedicating 20 years and more, myself as a disabled veteran to then be terminated. So I just wanted to say on behalf of me and my 6 colleagues that we're supporting each other, and the treatment that we received it was it was unjustified and was unwarranted. And again, they do the same things that I was doing. They dedicated themselves to their jobs every day. None of us had any disciplinary issues or performance issues whatsoever. So again, I thank Mr. Raskin for allowing us allowing me to share my story about my colleagues' wrongful terminations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Thank you for that excellent speech. That's the worst tirade I've heard since Donald Trump's speech. Okay. I'm liking. I'm calling up now Brendan Ballou, the former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C., the Capitol Siege Section, and former Special Counsel for Private Equity in the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division, a real DOJ lawyer, Brendan Ballou.
I'll try to, I speak kind of quietly, but I'll try to speak up for all of you. My name is Brendan Ballou. I, like Sean, was a former prosecutor in the Capitol Siege Section, prosecuting January 6 rioters. As all of you know, January 6th was an attack on our democracy, but it was also an attack on specific officers, the officers that were trying to defend the Capitol and the people in it that day. Now, 140 officers, 140 officers were assaulted that day. And in working to prosecute those cases, I talked to officers that had been assaulted, that had been attacked with flagpoles, wrenches, pipes, dragged into the crowd, and threatened to be killed. These rioters did all of these things, but they did more than that. Many of these rioters were violent before the attack on the Capitol. For instance, one rioter stabbed a 19-year-old to death in a public park. Another rioter, when he was in the military, shot a unarmed, handcuffed civilian in the head. These are 2 of the rioters that were pardoned by Donald Trump on January 20th. They are free now, and almost all of them can buy guns. Now, I think what's important to understand is that because of these mass pardons, America is facing a future of vigilante and militia violence in a way that it hasn't for generations. You know, this is something that happens in illiberal countries like Iran, yes, Argentina, Colombia, and so forth at various times in their history, but it's something that we haven't had to deal with since the Ku Klux Klan. But that time is coming to an end, and that violence, unfortunately, is in our future. Now, This administration has been perfectly happy to talk about the pardons that they've issued, but they've been less willing to talk about some of the things that are happening in this building right now. Things like the fact that they have disbanded the public integrity section that prosecutes corrupt politicians, that they've ended prosecutions under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits foreign bribery, that they are dismantling the criminal section of the antitrust division that goes after price-fixing conspiracies, like price fixings in the egg industry, for instance. This administration hasn't been willing to talk about those things because if they were made public, they would be enormously unpopular. And so I want to say thank you all for coming out, given the weather, given the commotion, because I want to say what you're doing is really important. The more attention that is paid to the fact that the infrastructure for going after rich criminals is being dismantled, the more attention that we can pay to that basic fact, the less popular it will be and the less likely it will be that it happens. So thank you to the journalists that are covering these stories. Thank you to the activists that are working on these. Thank you to the citizens that are following this and that are paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan Blue. That was awesome. All right, let's see who really has respect for law enforcement, because I'm about to bring up a great police officer who defended the democracy, who defended the Congress, who defended the Capitol on January 6th. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Officer Harry Dunn.
Wow, that's crazy, right? However, this is exactly the type of person that was at the Capitol on January 6th. That individual doing all the screaming. Donald Trump would call him a useful idiot. That guy's a useful idiot. And that's why Donald Trump pardoned all the people on January 6th. That's why he pardoned them, to have them on standby. That guy, yeah, he's a useful idiot. He's saying God bless Donald Trump. When is the last time he's been to church? Is this how God acts? Is this how God acts? Is God okay with what happened on January 6th? He's doing all that talking. Listen, it's a slap in the face, an insult, and listen, it's been 4 years, and I wish that I didn't have to be out here talking about January 6th still. Why? Because Donald Trump has not let it go. Not only did he not let it go, he put on retainer a mob to do it again. What happened on January 6th, he pardoned everybody and let them know that it's okay. Now listen, I don't know what accountability looks like. I don't know what this fight is going to continue to look like, but we have to keep on showing up. We have to keep standing up. I'm so grateful to be standing with these fine gentlemen right here who refused, even after they were fired, wrongfully in many cases. Some resigned. You can't quit. You can't quit. That's my message right now. I don't know if it's going to be okay, but what's going to happen? Well, how do we? Sorry, I'm getting all flustered with this guy because I just want to get all. I just want to go like. What we have to do is make sure we keep showing up. We only win by fighting and keep. He wants us to stop right now, and if we go away right now, he wins. Absolutely not. He's a useful idiot, and that's why Donald Trump loves people like him. So thank you.
Thank you, Officer Dunn. I just want to underscore one thing that he said. The new U.S. attorney that they appointed in Washington, D.C., sacked more than a dozen prosecutors just because they prosecuted January 6th insurrectionists. Then they asked for a roundup of all the FBI agents, thousands of FBI agents who worked on the most massive criminal case in American history. All right, do we have a couple of questions? And will you show some respect for the blue?
Zero. Don't back the blue. You don't back nobody. You're useful.
Are there any questions? Or maybe we should just do it randomly and people can.
God bless.
You can approach people individually because it's impossible to hear up here. Thank you all for coming, and I want to thank all of our great speakers. Please give them a round of applause for all of their great work. Yeah. Okay. Yes? Well, you're a disgrace to your entire family, okay?
Still alive. Still alive.
God bless Donald Trump.
I'm gonna take questions or no?
God bless Donald Trump.
We'll have one by one questions if anybody wants to